Bartlett Committee of the Whole meeting for April 5th, 2016. I call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Trustee Ahrens?
Yes.
Kammerer?
Here.
Carbonaro?
Here.
Daney?
Here.
Hopkins?
Here.
Ranky? Absent. President Wallace?
Here. First item we have in our Committee of the Whole meeting this evening is under Planning and Zoning, which is Chairman Ranky, who's absent. I will take care of Chairman Ranky's duty here with Bartlett's Ridge Subdivision discussion. There's petitioner here with an amended final subdivision plat, an amended preliminary final PUD plan, and a special use permit for the amended PUD land urban development of wetlands. The subject property is located on the east side of Naperville Road, approximately 1,200 feet south of Lake Street. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a project that you saw before, and you granted approval of their preliminary plat and their zoning. It is on the east side of Naperville Road, approximately 1,200 feet south of Lake Street. The petitioner is William Ryan Holmes, and they are petitioning for a 49-lot subdivision that will have 47 buildable single-family lots, generally in keeping with the same layout that is in the preliminary plan. They did have some changes to the design of it, because as you may remember, there was some stormwater issues and some drainage issues with the property owners to the north. The church of which was World Overcomers, it's now the Iglesia Baptista Church, couldn't work out those differences, and so the engineering design has driven a change in the development. So they are asking for an amended preliminary final PUD plan, a special use for that amended final PUD plan, and then they also encountered some wetlands in their development in the detention area, and it's hard to see here, but generally the darker area in the circle is where the wetlands are located. That necessitates a special use under our ordinance. They would also like to continue on with the same basic lot pattern, and the rear lot lines being, here's the wetland, sorry. The rear lot lines being a little reduced because as the PUD, they will also continue to heavily buffer and landscape the perimeter area to the subdivision to the south. They have removed the emergency access that, as you remember, once went through the Cadillac Ranch parking lot. Our fire district and the staff believed that it wasn't as necessary as they had originally thought. There is an ability to get through there if in an emergency, but it's not going to have that elongated easement that went all the way through the Cadillac Ranch property. It's here, the petitioner is here, Nate Wisma, his attorney, Mark Iden. They are represented, their landscape architect and other people for their development. So if you have any questions, they are here to answer them. But it is in front of you prior to moving on to the Plan Commission for the necessary public hearings.
Thank you, Jim. Anybody have any questions for the developer?
I have a question for staff. Is the 7-foot side yard, is that, that's part of our SR4?
It's actually, Brian has stated that we can go down the 5-foot. So they have asked, really the changes that have to do with the PUD are more rear yard setbacks.
Okay.
From the last time this was in front of us, Mr. Planzinski, did they add that the bike path to the existing park over there?
Their bike path on lot 49 is to be maintained by the Park District, and they have added it, and I don't see what slide shows it, but they did add it.
I think we recommended that at the last meeting, so
right.
I appreciate them adding that. And I also appreciate them doing the tree survey.
Yes.
That is, it looks quite an...
it's an extensive tree survey. I don't know how many of those trees will survive, but they will try to save as many as they can on the perimeter.
Does that change anything with the wetlands, as far as the trees go in the wetland area there?
I'm going to let them answer that one. Nate, do you want to handle that?
Yeah, Nate Weinsman with William Ryan Homes. No, not too much from the plan that we had previously, except to say that the detention area and / wetland area has been modified now to worked with the county and with your consultants to come up with a more enhanced wetland design basin instead of just a detention area. So much more extensive planting plan for that area to be a naturalized wetland.
Well, am I understanding this plan correctly? When I see the circles around the wetland area, those circles are small circles, are trees, are they existing trees or trees you intend to plant in that detention area or retention area or not?
I thought it was all existing.
Good evening, Carl Krogstad, landscape architect and arborist for the project with Krogstad Land Design Limited. There are both some existing trees and then proposed trees, as well as the wetland to meet the new, the native plantings that meet the new stormwater requirements.
So these aren't existing trees that are already there that you're trying to save in that wetlands? That's not the case?
Well, in the areas that there's grading taking place, there are newly proposed plantings.
All right.
And there are, where we can save trees, we're saving them, but the majority, in that area we do have some grading going on, and therefore we're putting in new landscaping wherever there's grading.
So is the grading going to take place even in the wetland area then? Yeah? So we're talking about just basically grading that whole thing, making it into detention area or retention area, and then planting new plants in that area, not saving.
Yeah, the whole area has storage capacity to it, but it's designed, even some of the last changes, I think, that had to do with the outfall. It's designed to function as a wetland. So even though there is, I guess what I would refer to as bounce for storage, once that bounce reduces down, it's designed to be a naturalized wetland basin.
Well, I just recall that when you first came in with this, I took a drive out there, and there's quite a bit of trees and stuff in that area. I just think it's a shame that you got to, to take out so many. I understand the idea of the detention area, but I was hoping that somehow, if you think about a detention area as being sloped and banks and all that kind of stuff, I keep thinking, why couldn't there be trees on the banks and top of it? I just don't understand that reasoning, just for some degree, but that's...
Well, there is some of that in the landscape plan, but it wouldn't be as wooded as you see it today.
I guess it's the way it's going to be.
Any other questions for staff or developer? And we recommend that we move this on to the Planning Commission.
Second.
Sure.
Next item we have under Planning and Zoning is the 2007 Ridgemore Drive fence variance. As we have in our packet, the variation to allow a 6-foot high fence where a 4-foot high fence is permitted. The Zoning Board of Appeals reviewed this variation request, conducted a public hearing, and recommended approval at their March 3rd, 2016 meeting. I think the staff is looking for this to be moved on to the board for a vote.
That's correct.
Does anybody have any questions about the fence? Thank you, gentlemen. Anybody have any questions about the fence variance for staff?
Mr. Planzinski, do you have any issues with this?
No. It went to the Zoning Board of Appeals after they had extensive discussions with the staff. I think the staff and the Zoning Board probably would have not been in favor of it had the petitioner wanted to keep the fence on the property line, because we just adopted the 4-foot fence requirement, but the petitioner moved it back 10 feet off of the property line, and I think the staff as well as the zoning recommended that was a concession, and we didn't have much issue with it.
I actually drove out there, and I looked at the property, and I walked around the property, and with the setback that they have of the 10 feet that Jim had just talked about, I don't believe there'll be any visibility issues, any safety issues whatsoever. And also, I looked at a couple other properties. Again, this is on a corner lot, and when you look at it from the corner down the Cedar Field, from Ridgemore, there doesn't seem to be any problem with safety with the 10-foot, with them moving it back 10 feet. If they had left it on if they had left it where it could have been, then there would have been an issue. But with them moving it back 10 feet. And in addition to that, well, I saw some other ones that had the same height on Ridgemore and also on Cedar Field. And also, if you read through the packet that the Coxes presented before the ZBA, they really have a need for some type of protection there. I reached out to Jim and we discussed this, and I know that Chief Williams is aware of this. There's a serious problem that's occurring in that area right now, and it's really, if you take a look at the amount of people young children that are coming up and knocking on their windows and then running away, destroying their Christmas lights, coming on their decks, ringing bells and running away. Well, I know that happens, but I mean in their backyards. And I really believe in my heart that we should offer them some type of peace and serenity if it's available, and that's why I think that this should move onto the board and receive a favorable recommendation from the board for the variance.
Jim, this doesn't set any precedent, does it? We already have done things like this?
There have been fence variations granted in other subdivisions that are similar in nature. We had one last year, if you remember, on Struckman. They moved it back 10 feet or so off the property line, and I think both the zoning board and the village board granted a favorable review of it.
And from a visibility standpoint in this picture,
yeah, this is one view on there, and then here's another one that kind of looks, you can see the neighbor's car, and one doesn't quite capture it as well, but that is a 10-foot setback. This one's probably a little better. You can see down the street here. That's where the fence would end and then go up towards their house.
and they're putting in a wooden fence.
Wooden, like a, I don't know if it's called a stockade. It's not a stockade fence, but a wooden board on board, I believe.
Board on board.
Yeah.
I respect the input from the ZBA, and I hope they still send me Christmas cards. But in this situation, I just have a difference of opinion, and I fear for the safety of the residents that live there.
Does anybody else have any questions for staff regarding the variance?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at the picture and get this. The 6-foot fence is the yellowed-in area?
Kind of the yellowed-in area. I don't know if this is another view. The yellowed-in area.
So on that view right there,
Yeah.
the part that's going to be 6 feet, the 3 foot is going to disappear?
Yes, and then that'll be open yard. It doesn't quite translate. This is probably the best view. So where that fence will hit, but where this fence ends,
Yes.
this is 10 feet. So then this fence will proceed up to this area and then go back to the house.
Okay.
This will all be open yard here,
Okay, so that's been going
so
to be...
that you won't have the 3-footer there anymore.
And go to the next slide you just did up there, Jim.
This one?
Yeah.
Yes. And so does that 6-foot fence now extend past the 3-foot fence? Is that? Or
Well,
is
it's 3-foot fence will be gone.
Yeah.
I know, but-
It'll be a little further. Let me go.
it looks like it's projecting further than the fence is now.
It actually, on this one, shows it's on the same location.
Okay.
So it's just the way I think that superimposing came out. So it's going to stay right, basically in line with the same 3-foot fence.
And I was trying to remember reading through this. Were there objections from the neighbors?
None.
No.
That doesn't, if I can interject, that doesn't always mean anything. Forgive me for, my apologies to the neighbors that took the effort to do that, but they're not there forever. And the next guy that moves in may not like it. So, you know, who do we please?
Let's move it on.
I did have a comment, anyway. If the Coxes are here, are you here?
They are here.
I'm not a fence person. I think a 6-foot fence is in a residential area takes away from everybody's property. I think that if we grant this, we're going to grant it for many more. And what you're going to have is a neighborhood of walls. A 6-foot fence is a big fence. Mike, how tall are you? 6'3"? Who's 6 feet tall in this room?
Bill.
Could you stand up? Okay. The fence will be, oh, you can stand up. Wait. Could you stand up again, please? Okay.
Put your hands up in the air.
The entirety of the fence will be this high. Now, that means you can't see into that yard, and they can't see out. Now, it is a protection, I suppose, but I've been on the board for many years, and I don't think we've ever had a child abduction. Have we, Chief? Have we ever had a child abduction? Because of a short fence? No? Anyway, I'd just like to interject that a 6-foot high fence it's a border between neighbors and not an easy border to overcome. And that's my opinion on that.
Thank you. Jim, what are they entitled to right now, 4 feet?
Yes.
In this, they could have a 4-foot fence in that perimeter area, like we're
I just wanted to,
4 foot in the corner side yard. That's what
Right,
they're
that would be
entitled
4 foot.
to.
They're
They have a
reversed.
3-foot fence. They asked
Okay.
for, they have a 3-footer right there right now, that brown one. So they could have 4 feet, but
Right.
they asked for the 6.
right. Well, the first thing I want to do is just point out to the fact that 6 feet fence are common in this area because they currently exist in that area. You can find them if you drive along Ridgemore. The only difference is they're not reverse corner lots. You can find them almost across the street from the Coxes on Cedar Field. They also have the 10-foot fence.
Yeah,
And it's not a reverse corner lot.
They have a fence, 6 foot in their yard that's allowed.
They have a 6 foot in the backyard right now. And we are not setting a precedence. What we're saying is that this is a variation. The purpose and reason of the variation is so they can have a hearing, a public hearing with the committee members of the board. So there's no precedent being set. And in this case, I believe that this variation that they're requesting is fair and reasonable, and it should be granted. And I'm not going to belabor the board, but I can go through here and I can read the number of incidents that have occurred at the Cox's residence that have actually terrified them. And as far as somebody moving into the village, after the fact, the fence would be there. They would be very well aware of a fence being there. Our obligation, my obligation, is to protect the residents that currently live in this village, and I'm not worried about somebody else moving in at a later date. And I believe it would be a safety measure for the Coxes. So,
I just have a quick question. You'll probably be best to answer this. Where the current 6-foot fence stops,
Yes.
they didn't go get a variance for that, correct? That's
Right.
within our village code to have that?
That's in their rear yard, and then
not on the
you
corner.
can see, they transitioned it from here. This is, I'm just going to assume that that's where the rear yard turns into the corner side yard. So they complied with the current code by making that transition from 6 down to 3. And you see that in other areas.
Was there reasoning why they didn't think they could go to the 4, even to a 5-foot fence?
Can't go to 5.
Other than,
You can only go to 4 without a variation.
not very, but they could have gone, don't have to go completely to 6. You could go,
You need a variation.
Yeah, they asked for the 6 for the variation. They didn't want to go down and replace this 3-footer with a 4, because they felt, as Ray stated, and as you read in their minutes, they had some issues out there.
My understanding is they're concerned with the 4-foot fences. Is that the vandalism that's currently occurring there, or I don't know what else to call it. You know, when I read this, the thought came to my mind is that these people are resident of our community. They're not living in the south side of Chicago, and they're afraid to go to bed at night because of the acts of violence, of vandalism that's occurring there. And with a 4-foot fence, somebody could easily get over that 4-foot fence. And I believe a variance in this case is totally justified.
Well, I think we've heard both sides of very good discussion. My suggestion would be, at this point, it's already been through planning and zoning, my suggestion would be let's go to the board and vote on it. And it's still probably up in the air, so. Yep.
Thank you, Mayor.
So you have another 2 weeks to ask questions? Or?
No, send it on.
All right, next item we have in our Committee of the Whole meeting is under Finance and Golf, Chairman Daney.
Okay, we have a presentation by Mr. Tom Gavin from the firm of Robert and Baird regarding the new police facility. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Tom Gavin, Managing Director of the Robert W. Baird & Company, handle manager efforts in Illinois. I'm a Naperville resident, and very pleased to be working with the financial advisor. We were engaged a while back and asked to begin looking at options.
Oh, I put it away.
Oh, the bar. Got it.
Thank you.
Is that better? All right, thank you. Asked to start looking at options for possible financing of a police facility. As you're aware, financing is fairly complicated, so there's lots of ways you can do things. So we began looking at it, and through discussions with staff, are here to discuss a few options that we think might meet the need. But before I get into that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the bond market, which is what you'll be entering. Also about some of the factors that are affecting Illinois and the market for Illinois bonds, and then talk a bit about your bond rating and how that helps or doesn't help. By the way, it helps. Talk about talk about the assumptions we used in developing what we are talking about tonight. So one of the things about the general interest rate market is that there's been a prediction of higher rates for almost 20 years. It's happened, we have been in a secularly improving, meaning lower interest rate market environment for easily 20 years. It bounces up and down a bit, but the general trend has been down. Most recently, as we appear to be coming out of the recession, the Fed began discussing increasing the Fed funds rate, which is a very short rate, to try to get money supply in the easing patterns that they had been doing before, more in line with an increasing economy. That then caused, over the past 6 months or so prior to this, caused a belief that interest rates in general would rise, not only short rates, but higher rates, but longer rates, I mean. And actually what's happened now is that economic activity hasn't accelerated the way it was expected to. And most recently, there's some concern expressed, not in very many circles, but in a few circles, that it's possible we could be entering a recession. In our market, the bond market, lower rates are better, but lower rates are counterintuitive to a general improvement in the economy. If you get an improving economy, you generally have higher rates. So if you want lower rates, you generally have to accept a poorly performing economy. We're not to the point of recession, we don't think. Our economists don't agree with that. But the Fed has announced in anticipation of that, or in view of the economy not improving the way as anticipated, that it will slow its anticipated growth in interest rates. The whole reason for me giving you that market environment is you're looking at a fairly long-term horizon before you make your decisions about the building, go out for bids, design it, go out for bids, and then actually issue bonds, because the bonds come at the end of that process. So what we've tried to do is say, where do we think, when we make our estimates, where do we think the market is going? Because we don't want to talk to you today and then come back to you 6 months later when you're ready to issue bonds and say, well, it fell out of bed and costs are higher. You'll all be happy if it get better, so I don't worry about that part of it. But so as I talk about the assumptions we use, that's the start of where we look at things. Then we want to talk about the Illinois factor, or sometimes called the Illinois penalty. Illinois has become rather infamous in the municipal bond market. The problems are widely known by you all, but the way the market understands things is kind of at a 40,000-foot level. It sees problems and then shies away from those. Remember, bonds are meant to be a safe investment. So if you perceive to have risk in them and you're trying to invest in safe investments, then you're going to pull back from that. Maybe not invest as much. Maybe not invest at the levels of interest rates that you would prefer to invest at before this problem presented itself. So now we're looking at the underfunding of the state and local pension plans. They're very seriously underfunded. Inability to adopt a state budget, which creates a perception that nobody's in control. The insolvency of CPS, basically their last borrowing, the Chicago Public Schools, their last borrowing, the $750 million, was done at 8.5%. Had they not borrowed, they would have likely defaulted. That problem is only months old again, because this is a recurring problem. And finally, the problems of the state's largest city, Chicago, are just widely publicized as well. Some of those are all related to the same things, pensions, but there are a lot of other things going on. So as a result of all of that, what's happened is the market has decided that Illinois isn't as attractive anymore. For instance, Allstate has decided, and it decided a number of years ago, that it wouldn't invest at all in Illinois paper. It's an Illinois-based firm. It's right up on the tollway. It is a very large investor in municipal bonds, but it will not buy Illinois bonds. So what happens when that happens? Well, this market is just supply and demand. If more people are willing to buy, then the price goes down. If more people are unwilling to buy, then the price goes up. So in order to entice people to buy your bonds, you will have to pay more than an issuer of similar credit quality in another state. That penalty has varied over the past couple of years. It's been around for 3, 4, 5 years, something like that. The penalty has been as low as 10 basis points and as high as about 50. Right now it is about 50. So the penalty is there. When we give you the rates, it takes that penalty into account. Should everything get better before you sell, should a budget be adopted and the pension problems of the state and the local units be solved and all of these other things go away, then hopefully that penalty diminishes. We might see some trend that way, who knows. But I wanted you to be aware of that factor that enters into it. The other thing, one thing that's going, the market is working well for you, but it's not working as well as it is for other state issuers, issuers in other states. But one thing is going very well for you is your bond rating. You currently carry a AA1 rating by Moody's. AA1 is the second highest rating you could have. AAA is the next. So the way it goes is A1, AA3, AA2, AA1, AAA. So AAA is the best you can get. Very few people have that rating. The United States government has that rating, so but there's very few Illinois issuers that have it. But you have the highest rating, and that takes into account your economy, your demographics, your financials, your reserve levels, the way you're managed, and the policies you've adopted. All the things go into saying this is a well-run community with sufficient financial strength that it deserves a rating nearly equal to the United States government. So you should be proud of that, and it will help you when you issue bonds, because those who are willing to buy Illinois paper will only want to buy the best of the Illinois paper. So you will be among the best. Now, I'll now get into the assumptions we used for developing the numbers. When you calculate how much does your debt cost, it's a lot like when you're buying a car or a home. What's your down payment? How much does the house cost? How long are you going to pay it back over? What is the interest rate you're going to pay? And in our case, what we wanted to do was, and what the village staff was interested in seeing, is what would the impact be on a typical homeowner? So what would the bill be every year when they get their tax bill? So those are the factors we considered. And how do those impact? Well, the project size determines everything. It's the place you start. We're looking at a $20 million project, so that's where we start. The next question is, do you want to make a down payment or not? Many municipalities don't. You have sufficient reserves. The staff asked us to consider that you make a contribution to the payment. And depending on what amount you use, that determines, with the interest rate assumption and the years you funded over, what the annual payment will be. So then the amortization period becomes a question. How long are we going to pay this back? Your past practices have been to pay back over 20 years. This is a building. It'll last a long time. Homes are financed over 30 years routinely. This building could be justifiably financed over a 30-year period. You start paying more interest, certainly in amount of interest. You pay interest for a longer period of time, and the dollar amount of that interest grows. The village staff wasn't interested in seeing that long of a financing period, but they said, well, how about 25? Let's see what that does to the numbers. So we're presenting you with numbers with both a 20 and a 25-year repayment option. You can see what it looks like. The interest rate assumptions we used, we have an underwriting desk, and they buy bonds. They buy more bond issues than anybody else in the country. We've been number one in that category for probably about 10 years. So they're very skilled at how to buy these bonds. We wouldn't be buying these bonds from you, but I can ask my underwriting desk, what would they think your bonds ought to go for today? So we asked them that, and they gave us what's called an interest rate scale. So you borrow 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. It's like 20 or 25 different bond issues that you put a different interest rate depending on how long it goes out. And then you average them all out, apply a weighting factor, and your average interest rate becomes whatever it is. What we did was take that and then said, we've got, our desk gave us that, our underwriting desk gave us that. And we said, okay, but, we're looking at probably 6 months away. We should probably, in order to be conservative, add an increase in that. We looked at what Bloomberg had been predicting. Bloomberg conducts a survey every quarter of economists, and they predict what their assumptions are as the interest rate grows over a period of time. It goes out about 2 years, and then there's scattered things for after that. People really only pay attention to about the next year. Economists are never that right, so they're not going to be right every 2 years. They're likely only to be right close in 1 year. So if you look at that for about 6 months, it was about 50 basis points. And we said, Okay, well, that's a reasonable. So let's increase the estimated interest rate that we're going to use on our calculations by a half a point. That's called 50 basis points, by the way. Sorry to get into jargon. So if we were going to have interest rates at 3%, we're going to make it 3.5%, so that when we get there, if it's 3.5%, you're getting what you expected. If it's less, good. Well, all of those interest rate assumptions were before this. The most recent survey was before this kind of decline in interest rate growth expectations. So that's probably a little bit pessimistic, but we kept it the same just to be conservative. So what did we do? So let's look at each of the options. You have copies of this?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So the first one, I'll explain each column on this one, but I'll skip, I'll just talk about other things. I won't have to explain each column for each one. So in our industry, we talk about bond years, and the bond year ends when the bond principal is paid. It's paid once a year, interest twice a year. For our purposes, we aggregated the interest and assumed only one payment, so these bond years assume the total payment due during the course of the year. We assumed your current EAV. We could have assumed that it grew, but it really won't matter, because unless it grows disproportionately, that is, unless either your residential component or your industrial component, commercial component grows faster than the other side, it'll all wait out and be exactly the same. So we just said, we don't care if it grows. It'll drive a lower tax levy, but not a lower tax amount. So we said, we'll assume the EAV stays the same at slightly over $1 billion, almost $1.1 billion. I'm going to direct you now to the bottom column, the bottom set of columns that says sources and uses of funds. This is like when you sit down and pencil out how much you're going to put aside for buy your house. The purchase price, the other costs, your closing costs and things like that. That comes up with your total, and then you say, okay, now I want to know how much can I put down, and then the balance is how much you're going to borrow in your mortgage. That's what this is. So we say we're going to borrow $20 million, deposit to the project fund. That's the first uses of funds. There's going to be some costs of issuance, which costs of issuance are you'll have to pay us, rating agencies, printing an official statement. We try to be conservative with that, meaning we try to estimate it high, and we think we have here. But everybody that's involved, there's paying agencies, there's bond registrar, there's a whole host of people that are involved doing this. There's local counsel, there's bond counsel. Everybody who's involved, just assume that you're paying the bill. That'll be the safest thing for you to do. And what we've done is estimated those in aggregate and then shown them here as about $340,000. So that means you need to raise $20,340,000 to get enough so that you net $20 million for the project. For this assumption, we're going to assume that you deposit $3.5 million. You take out of reserves $3.5 million, apply that to the project, and the net amount you borrow then is $16,840,000. Now, I'll go back to the bigger set of columns. The first one that's labeled principal shows that every January 1st, you're going to make a payment of the principal amount that you owe, the principal amount you borrowed. That grows every year. It grows like your mortgage amortization grows. If you've ever looked at it, you start at very low principal, and at the end, it's almost all principal. Because what's happening is on the opposite side of that, you're having your assumed interest. So your interest starts out relatively small, $655,000. Ignore the first period; it's short interest period. Starts off at about $655,000, and then falls to $49,000 at the end. So that the total debt service or your total mortgage payment is about $1.1 million. The interest rates we assumed on that is the assumed coupon column that I skipped over. So you can see where we assumed what they would be. The average, by the way, is about 4.25%. So then we say, okay, what tax levy is required based on your total EAV to pay that $1.1 million every year? And we found that it's roughly 10 cents per thousand, which is, in this example, about $85 for a $250,000 home. So that's the first assumption. I'll stop here if you have any questions, because I was just going to move on to the next one.
I think we're okay, yeah. I mean, I think everybody here has a mortgage, so they can kind of get it.
Okay, so the next one, you should have one that at the top in the third line says 20 million project, 4.54 million contribution, 25-year amortization. Okay, this assumes now that instead of adding, contributing $3.5 million, that you actually contribute $4.5 million. What does, and then instead of amortizing it over 20 years, that you're amortizing it over 25 years. So what do both of those assumptions do? If you're putting down more money and nothing else changes, your payment goes down. If you extend the term, your payment goes down even further. But what happens, but then in return for that, because you're paying for over a longer period of time, your total cost of interest goes up. So I can demonstrate what happens. So let's just now skip, because all of the other assumptions are the same. Let's just skip to the total debt service column, where in the previous one we were looking at $1.1 million. In this one we're looking at $1,033,000. And instead of 10 cents, it's about, oh, I'm sorry, instead of 10 cents, it's about 9.5 cents. And the annual cost per taxpayer is about $79, just slightly below $80 a month, or a year, sorry. Now, compared to the last one, you have it in your hand. So if you want to just turn back to the last one and go under the assumed interest column, you'll see that the interest component of that payment over time was about $11 million, $10,910,000. You see the bottom of that column labeled assumed interest. In this one, it's $10,222,000. Why? In this case, it's a little less, but why is that? It's a little less because you're putting more down. If you hadn't put down more, this would be a much higher number. The final assumption option that we're looking at is one that says, okay, what if we do a 20-year amortization? We change nothing about the assumptions other than amortize it over a shorter period of time to see if we can squeeze some of that interest cost, get that $10,200,000 down. And if you look on this one, you'll see, I'll go right to that assumed interest cost column. It's $4 million or $7,500,000 roughly. So you're pretty much cutting off about $3 million or so of interest by amortizing it over a shorter period of time. What's the give back? The higher annual debt service. So this is the highest annual debt service we've shown you so far. So $1,157,000. What does that do to payment? It's about just shy of $90, $88, $89. So you can see how the components all work to drive different assumptions and different goals. And we're indifferent as to how you proceed. It's very much policy. You could borrow over 1 year and have your interest be zero if you couldn't afford the payment. You could go to 30 years and it would be much less than the $70-some, but it would be a lot more interest. You could put more money down, but you'd probably dig deeply into reserves. You could put nothing down, but then everything else goes up. So you can see there's an infinite number of solutions. We tried to give you something that you could get your arms around and make some basic policy decisions, and and then tell us how you'd like us to proceed.
Sure. Does anybody have any questions? I think this is a great example, and it keeps it simple, which is nice, and I think it's very easy to read, which is nice. So, does anybody have any questions for?
I have a question. How was Robert W. Byrd and Company chosen?
We have had them as our financial consultant for several years now, and we wanted a consultant who did a lot of municipalities and does the same kind of work that we would want. There are not a lot of those out there, and we interviewed Mr. Gavin and decided he was the man for the job.
Does any municipalities, when they do projects like this, ever put it out to bid when they sell bonds?
Oh, absolutely. We will. Yeah, we're talking about the bonds itself. We will do a competitive bond bid.
I'm talking about the actual company that's selling these bonds, which is his company, correct?
Not a bid.
Oh, Mr. Gavin is our
Sometimes
financial.
there's an RFP, but there's a specific expertise. So there's only a handful, and they're top-notch. And we had another before that we weren't as satisfied with. We had someone who retired. So it's not a huge universe, and it's very specialized. So.
It will be a bond underwriter who will sell the bonds, and we don't do negotiated sales of bonds. I think that you never get the lowest interest rate on that.
Okay.
Any other questions? Fantastic. Thank you for the presentation. That enlightens us all. Sorry if the corporate finance got us a little bit dreary here.
I've been in the industry a long time. I understand.
Thank you. All right, Chairman Daney.
That's, Mr. President, that's all we have under Finance and Golf Committee agenda.
Final item we have under the Committee of the Whole meeting is under Police and Health Committee Chairman Carbonaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a discussion for our police building study, and I believe we have Mr. Bushhouse in the audience. Take it away.
Yes, thank you. You can go up here.
Same rates that this guy.
This is
1.7% commission.
Ouch.
This is Mark Bushhouse, who is back. Do a number of things this evening. The first thing is to answer the questions that the board raised last time. And then I think you have a couple of new designs to show the board, so that's what we're going to do.
Thank you again, Mark Bushhouse, President of Williams Architects, and we've been working with your staff for some weeks now, months actually, doing some planning. So glad to be back. As your manager said, we received some questions from you last time around, and so we've worked with staff and have researched the answers to them. I believe you probably all have these, but I'll give a quick overview on each, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask whatever you want. So, in considering the options for the facility on the site, one of the questions was, could we put the building site for the police station south of the existing village hall? There's some parking areas. Could we get maybe one of those options up there for slide? So, you're looking at Main Street and Railroad, here, existing police, existing village hall, and there's property here to the south of the village hall that has some more water systems there. And staff research to create available property there to possibly be considered for this project would cost the 100 plus the 700 to move the water tank and the pumping systems elsewhere. So we'd be spending about $800,000 to do that. Plus you've got to build some additional elevated storage somewhere else. So there's some significant dollars there involved to free that land up. And also as we look at the possibilities of how much land is available should those uses be relocated, the land area that it would free up is really not adequate to build a police station parking there. So unfortunately, as much as, you know, it's good to look at every option available, it appears this one would be far more expensive than the land you would free up and the amount of parking you could put there. Any questions on that question? The next, there was a question about if some of the options that we're looking at, would any of those still provide, you know, access to parking for downtown, including the fire barn? And we have two concepts we're going to review with you this evening. Each of them does maintain parking for the municipal campus here for the police and the village hall, and those parking areas would still be available to support the downtown. Well, some of the options we're looking at do take away some of the parking that's immediately adjacent to the barn. So they may have to walk around a part of the building if we chose that direction with the design to get to just a regular municipal parking lot. Any questions on that? The next, one of the very good questions, not good questions, but this one was about, since site area is clearly at a premium here, trying to fit this into the existing municipal campus, we had been proposing a building that had a basement and 2 levels above grade. And the question was, well, what if we added another level above grade? So if we had a basement and 3 levels above grade, would that help us? What are the pros and cons of that? And we did look into that, and there are 2 factors that weigh against the benefit of reducing our site coverage. One of them is in designing police stations, and again, talking through the uses of the facility with your police department. There are a number of uses that really are quite important to have on the main level, and it's difficult to locate them either in a basement or a second floor or higher. So there's some compromises on the layout for the police department if we start stacking this building in a higher way and shrinking the main level footprint. Also, another important factor about how the municipal campus fits into the context of this area and the downtown. The village hall really looks like about a 2-story building above grade. And if we did the police station 3 levels above, now the police station would be noticeably higher than the village hall, which would create a difficult time to make these buildings appear as a campus and one basic municipal place, where the police now is kind of leaning over the village hall a bit. So we're concerned about how that would appear and look on the site. So we're concerned that maybe the cons outweigh the pros on that. Questions I can answer.
And by that, you're talking about this right here, we're talking about a 3-level police facility right now, and you're saying that basically wouldn't make sense.
Correct.
Okay.
The cons outweigh the pros. And then, the idea of, we're working with remodeling portions of the existing building. We're trying very hard to keep the police on site during this, and yes, there are some real inconveniences for them that we'll have to deal with during construction. So a question was asked, well, what if we simply move the entire police department off-site while the construction is taking place? Therefore, their operations wouldn't be impacted during construction, and the entire police site area will be available for construction all at one time. So certainly some good goals there that could be worth considering. We worked with staff and talked about what space might there be in the village that the police could move into, what would that possibly cost to rent for a year, what about moving the police into this building and then back again. And then we also have to understand that there isn't a building in town that's set up to be a police station right now. So whatever space we rent is going to have some real modifications made to it so it can fit their needs at least adequately for a year. Please note that there are some uses in the police that they still would go to another department to get help, like a gun range and their lockup areas. They could team with a local area department and lean on them for a year. So we wouldn't be building those kinds of specialized spaces, but offices. So believing they would need probably in the range of 20,000 square feet, and the cost to rent for a year in Bartlett could very well be in the $10 to $14 a square foot range. That puts us at the $200,000 to $280,000 to rent the space. And then the remodeling cost, it's it's really hard to know until we would actually see the building and see what changes would be necessary, but it could go all the way up to $150 a square foot, which means for 20,000 square feet at $150, we could spend up to $3 million to modify that space. Yeah. And then finally, you have to move there and move back, and those could easily run about $50,000 each, once 100. So those costs put together obviously add up to some real dollars here. We're 3.3 to almost 3.4 million as a possible cost. And working with your department and staff, we're concerned that that really would take away really important dollars away from the ultimate facility. And thus far, the police department is, the plan is looking that we can't keep them on site, and they are more than willing to muscle through, as it were, this process, devote all the money that's possible toward the building itself and keep the overall cost as low as we can. Any questions I can answer on that? And finally, questions are, police stations being built or have been built in the Chicago area. What have they cost? What are they looking to cost? Just as a point of reference on the 3 examples here, the programming work we've done for Bartlett indicates your police station should be around $53,400. So that's to give you an idea of the kind of size we're talking about. Hanover Park Police Department, that was built a number of years ago. They built a larger one, about 63, almost 64,000 square feet, and their total costs were running just about $19 million. Also, please note that when that project was bid out, the bidding climate was significantly different. They were one of the rare communities in the Chicago area that decided to bid a major project during a downturn, and they did reap some real rewards from doing that and the risk they took. Again, a larger building also tends to have a lower cost per square foot, so still a significant budget. Bensonville Police, that was a building that was put into an existing warehouse building that was in Bensonville, so they had the building, and this is the cost to remodel that into a police station. So they had the benefit of already having a building shell there that was adequately sized, almost adequately sized for the building. And they put the building up, I think it's been there about 2 years, so it probably bid 3 years ago, and there was about 47,000 square feet, and the cost was just under $16 million. And finally, an example that is really quite current with this facility, the city of St. Charles is also planning their new police facility. That's not one we are involved with, so I take no credit or blame for these numbers or how that project is going. But it is another municipality and a different firm, and they are looking at a building around 50,000 square feet, and right now their budget range is 18.6 to 21.8 for their facility. So they're building 50,000 square feet, obviously, is very close to what we're contemplating to do. Any questions I can answer on?
I have a quick question. I don't know if you'll have the answer for it, but the current police facility, I know it was kind of talked about putting a second level on it, and we couldn't do that because of the foundation. Could you tell me what the foundation requirements are and what currently we have?
Has there been a structural engineer out to do a very specific review? That has not happened. It's kind of planning level. That's not typical. The building was designed and the foundations were put in to hold the 2 levels that are there, the basement and the 1 story above grade. So therefore, that means the footings themselves, either on the edge of the building, under the foundations, or the square ones that are under each column, none of those would be large enough to sustain the weight above. They might have to each be twice the size they are right now, by square feet. And the columns that are sitting on them will all have to be replaced with bigger ones to hold the weight. And so therefore, we have to go all the way down to the basement, cut slab out, and put in bigger footings. And around the exterior walls, the footings are there. Generally kind of dig under the existing footings and then put a bigger one underneath it. And again, that's not real simple to do to increase the size. So that's a typical process, and hence the reason we're not excited about telling you that's a great way to save money, because by the time you do all of that, you pretty much ruin what's above it. And so it might be easier just to sort of pull things out of the way and go in and start fresh in some areas. Now, there are areas we are expecting to reuse. But any questions I can answer?
clarification again. This illustration you have up there currently with in the yellow in the beginnings and the third floor level, that would have a basement and then 3 levels above it, is what you were saying?
No, that was the idea that we looked at
Right.
and said it's not
It's
the
not
best
feasible.
idea. What you're looking at in the
That's
two
this.
concepts we're going to present this evening, they have 1 level below grade and 2 levels above,
Right.
like Village Hall.
Yeah, okay.
Any more questions?
That wasn't my question.
All right, moving on to the 2 concepts that we've been looking at and working with staff on. Please note for one, this is a planning level document. This is like that 40,000 foot that you heard about this evening, thinking about ideas here. We're just trying to show basic issues of site usage, where building can go, where parking can go, and how this could all work out. If you choose to move to the next steps on this project, then we would work with your staff and really get specific on where exactly how this would work best. So these are major ideas to at least give us a sense of does it fit in budget issues or budget costs. So this is the option 1, where again Village Hall is here, and you saw some dotted lines on the drawing to show where the existing police station is, and this area here is the existing shared municipal parking lot. And this concept, the idea was we would build a portion of the police station out front that had a basement and 2 levels, and that would be enough of the uses of the police department such that once it is done, we would actually, back up a moment here, we would leave the police in the building as they are, and they would continue to operate in that building. We would build this portion of the new building out in front of it, between where it is right now and Main Street, and that would have enough square footage so that when it is done, the police could basically move out of the building they're in now into this portion of the building, and then we would rework parts of it would be torn down, and we would put some additions on it, such that they would end up with the square footage and correct functions and layout that they would need as a department. And once, of course, this is done, they can do their final sort of spreading out. That means they now have gun range, they now have a detention area, they have garages.
What about parking?
Parking, the parking area here is some fewer spaces than you have now for municipal parking. You can share it between Village Hall and police for visitors. So we have lost a few spaces there. We went from like 50 some down to 30 some. So there is a compromise on this. And we then have a connection point between the buildings to still maintain good connection for staff. And then back here, police would have some parking here for special uses and staff. And then patrol could park their vehicles back here to be used. And then staff for the police department, at least at this stage of the game, still they are now currently parking along Oak Avenue, and they could continue to do that. So in the end, they would have a facility that would have a strong presence on Main Street, but yes, there is a diminished shared parking between the 2.
There doesn't seem to be a sufficient amount of parking. 30 parking places, there has to be an overflow, there has to be some other option for parking. 30 parking spaces is fully inadequate, in my opinion.
No disagreement that this is one of the options. It's not the favorite of the team. So, but they wanted to look at what if we did an addition that had a strong presence on. So, any more questions? We have an option B or option 2 we can look at as well.
This option you have up here originally, I think you had a breezeway going all the way from Oak Street all the way through.
Right, we did do that, and that had more parking. However, when we reviewed with staff, some concerns were we didn't have a physical link between the buildings, so staff had to go outside to move back and forth, which was a strong concern that it would diminish the connectivity between those departments. Because right now they work very closely, and it really helps to have the links you have now connecting the 2 buildings. And secondly, if that parking lot went all the way through, there was concern that people would use as a shortcut between Oak Avenue and Main Street. And that was seen as really a safety problem because we really would have people backing out of these parking spaces and walking between the buildings. So there was a concern that would not be optimal. Option 2, please. In option 2, we have maintained the existing municipal parking lot out front, right where it is. And so this one, obviously not necessary anymore. And therefore, we actually pick up a few more parking spaces here. So this entire municipal lot that's there would remain basically as is, except we would actually add a few spaces. So if you're like 52, something like that now, we could add another half dozen spaces to that. Then saying that there, we would initially build on the northern part of the facility. In this area, again, build a basement 2 levels above grade that would hold most of the police department's operations while they maintain their operation in the substantial portion of the building to the south. When that part is done, they can pick up and move over, and then we could rework portions of the building, add on to it as necessary, and we end up with a building that is, still significantly where the police station is now, and it'd be very simple to reuse the connecting link that's there and keep the buildings connected. So in this case, we have a major focal point entry at this corner, northwest corner of the parking lot that would go into police, just like at the southwest corner of the parking lot. Village Hall. So as you came into this whole lot, you would see 2 main entrances, one for Village Hall and one for police. And yes, there still is a link connecting them, so good flow back and forth, and no matter what door you walk in, you can get where you want to go. And it addresses the comment you made about what about parking, and actually it's better than it even is now.
You identify the phase 1 construction of the police facility as a 3-level police facility.
Basement and 2 above.
That's all right. Right. I'm reading that as 3 levels.
Yeah,
3-story.
One's below.
Yeah, okay. All right.
No, very good question. So these are the concepts that we're working with staff on, and right now this option 2 is, addresses their needs and maintains the parking in the best way. So there's a strong sense that as we would get into design, the ultimate design could very well start looking more like option 2 than option 1 as we really get into the details of it.
If you look at option 1 and option 2, the yellow part, you just turned it.
Turned it, put it back versus out the parking lot, right.
And went underneath a little bit, but it's the same building, just.
Same square footage, right.
Thank you.
Well, this is what I thought would make a lot of sense the last time when you're here presenting, is utilizing that parking lot for what the police department has, and then looking for off-site parking. And I think this makes a lot of sense doing it this way.
I would hate to lose the parking that we have now. Yeah, I mean, Chief, do you have any comments on this?
Correct. Yeah, and there's other questions of parking and stuff, and off-site parking, and those things can be addressed as well. But as far as an initial first glance, I think this is doable. I think we've really worked hard with Mark and entire staff and the village to make sure that we can remain operational, effective, efficient, and safe without all the expended expense of moving off and camping out somewhere for a year. That really seemed cost prohibitive. So this was the way he worked very hard with us and our staff to figure out how we could do it and stay with a budget and keep it here. So I was very pleased with how hard he worked on that.
Chief, what do you envision the basement area in a new area? Say we do with this plan too, and we went to the basement. What would that basement be utilized? And I guess the reason I'm asking that is have we thought about that, making it underground parking as well?
We have discussed that. We have discussed that, and again, that'll come down to numbers and real use of space. But that is something that he's willing to take a look for us.
And if I understand, you're leaning towards option 2?
The second option is correct.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
We thought that was most advantageous for the entire downtown, to maximize parking.
So I think if any more questions, please ask.
I like option 2, and I think if we could work underground parking in there into the budget, I think that would be extremely good amenity to have.
Your department has been very, I'll say, frugal in only asking for the amount of garage parking for the patrol cars that they really think is essential, because they know there's $1 attached to that.
Yeah.
Other patrol vehicles, we're putting in some covered areas outside to at least keep the snow and ice from building up on them when they might need them, and then the remainder simply would park outdoors like any other car. So they've been pretty careful about what they ask for.
We have some further reviews, I think, when you go into executive session that we'd like to talk about.
Both options are the same square footage?
Yes.
And what are we at now, 22,000?
Slightly less than that.
And I'm assuming because of option 2's, we're just going to basically tear out whatever's in the police station now and revamp the building.
Yeah, the areas of reuse of the existing building are not expected to have that levels of upgrade. These can be turned into, there are some zones that we're looking at building as a one-story building above grade with some basement under it. And in those cases, in those areas, reusing the existing building and its structure can work quite effectively.
With option 2, is there going to be costs for relocation, or no, we're going to be?
We would not need to relocate. No.
Thank you. All the money goes towards
Or parking spots?
and reducing the budget, of course.
Have we had any comments from the public at all on our website or anything?
Premature.
What's the web address?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions before we?
No.
Thank you. That's it, I believe. We'll be going directly into executive session after we adjourn the Village of Committee of the Whole meeting. We'll go into an executive session to discuss property acquisition pursuant to Section 2C5 of the Open Meetings Act. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the Committee of the Whole. Moved by Trustee Daney, seconded by Trustee Hopkins. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Ahrens?
Yes.
Camera?
Yes.
Carbonaro?
Yes.
Daney?
Daney?
There you move.
Daney?
Yes.
Hopkins?
Yes.
We are adjourned.